Hello friends. In this video, we will briefly discuss the concept of data monetization and how it is related to the data protection law. In India, we are just trying to develop a new data protection law. So we are in a position, or at least we are free to perhaps look at what is good for the industry in terms of the legal provisions to be placed in the law, one of which could be the data monetization requirements. In fact, very recently, IRCTC floated one tender asking for consultants to conduct a study and find out whether IRCTC could look at some kind of data monetization. Unfortunately, this proposition was immediately pounced upon by the privacy activists, and IRCTC actually withdrew the proposition. In a way, the attempt of IRCTC was just to conduct a study, and if the study had given them a green signal, perhaps they would have done something to monetize the data. Instead of looking at the intentions and how it is likely to be used, the activists brought such a pressure on IRCTC that IRCTC also lost the confidence and quickly withdrew the proposition. Now, this actually is an indication of how data monetization often gets into conflict with different kinds of stakeholders in the market. Now, data protection law is related to privacy, and therefore one of the prime stakeholder is the individual whose privacy has to be protected, and they are normally represented by privacy activists, and they try to pitch for a very high level of privacy, almost like saying that no personal data should be processed. On the other hand, we have the government which needs to process personal data of its citizens, both for the purpose of passing on some benefits back to the citizens, and also to ensure law enforcement is effective. Additionally, sometimes the government may have to do a study on what it can do to provide benefits to the citizens. In such case, you can say that the government will be profiling the citizens and so on, but that profiling is essential for the purpose of researching on what kind of services can be rendered. So building a balance between these three stakeholders is a very important aspect of constructing a good data protection law. Now in India, we are at an advantageous state as of now that we have started on a new draft of a data protection law. So like a zero-based planning, we can actually look at the best, you can say, format of a data protection law, better than GDPR, better than CCPA, and so on, if we have an open mind. So that is the context in which I would like to look at data monetization. Now, some people will immediately look at data monetization as something evil, and it should never be allowed. But coming to think of it, businesses exist because they make money. And if data is an asset, it will be natural for businesses to actually look for ways and means of converting the data into some kind of income for the organization. So data monetization should be looked at as a very natural business, you can say, objective of any organization. Now, what we are concerned, or we should be concerned as privacy activists, are that the data principal is properly informed and his consent is obtained by the organization which is going to monetize his data. There is nothing more sacrosanct than the consent. Of course, the consent has to be obtained after giving proper information to the data principal, and he has understood the implications of providing that consent. Once an informed consent is obtained, now if the data is used by the organization to make money, I think that is something which should be acceptable to the society. We can always debate that the organization which makes money out of the data principal should actually share part of that spoils with the data principal. So, you can bring a parallel to the copyright kind of a scenario where a literary work like a song goes through several layers of value building. Like somebody writes the song, somebody puts lyrics into a particular musical thing, and then somebody records, somebody uses it in a movie or something like that. At each layer, the value builds up, and the copyright of the original, say, poet is preserved, but additional copyright value is being shared by others. So this is a thing which has been accepted in the copyright scenario. So when we talk of the theory of data, which I have been discussing for some time, I have stated that when this value buildup takes place, then at each level, whoever builds the value, they should be able to reap the benefits. So similarly, in the case of data monetization, this data monetization happens in stages, and it is always possible to ensure that the data principal has got reasonable reward for his data. Now, most of the time, the data principal is not in a position to make money out of his own data, only when he shares it with somebody else. And when that receiver of the data aggregates similar data, actually value gets created. In fact, a single personal data set may not have any value, but if similar 1,000 or 1,000,000 data sets are aggregated, then there is a value, and there could be a proportionate benefit to each of the personal data contributing persons, which is better than zero. So therefore, it's a very strange situation where the data, if it is monetized, it can be done only by aggregating a large number of data. The only other way data can be monetized is by criminals who take one person's credit card data and try to misuse it. We are not talking of that. We are talking of a big data organization which is using the data for some positive purpose. Now, that kind of data monetization can also be done mostly with anonymized data. In fact, big data industry does not always require the full particulars of or identity of the data principal. In fact, they may require a certain age profile, a location profile, or something like that, but they don't want the exact name of the person or the identity of the person. So, in most of the cases of data monetization, for a positive use, we have no reasons to actually misuse the personal identity of the contributor of the data. But we need to have a mechanism by which the identified personal data becomes anonymized personal data, or in some cases, a pseudonymized personal data. So monetization per se is not an anathema. It should be possible to accept it as a business practice, but it should be linked to the protection of privacy with an appropriate anonymization or pseudonymization. This is what I call as privacy compliant monetization. That is, not all monetization is bad, but there is a way of monetizing it. In fact, the digital advertising industry is a way of monetization of personal data. And advertising is an essential business requirement. And without advertising, the producer of a goods or services is unable to reach to its potential customers. So therefore, advertising has a role in the society for promotion of business, and advertising requires a kind of profiling. And by profiling and then using the profile in some form to create profiles which can be used by individual advertisers, there is a monetization happening in the process. So, when we are going to have our data protection law, the government has to give a serious thought to ensure that data monetization is given some kind of a flexibility within the law. That is, the law has to prescribe what is data monetization by way of a definition, and whether it should be in the form of licensing or any other way, and ensure that profiling for advertising is also considered acceptable, maybe as a sensitive personal data, and by having a proper mechanism by which data can be anonymized, then monetized, they can actually help the industry also to benefit from the principle of data monetization. In fact, if you look at the principle of data governance, which was enunciated by the Chris Gopalakrishna committee, it actually recommended that there should be an exchange mechanism where data can be bought and sold. And obviously, the data which is bought and sold is anonymized data, because personal data, at least when Chris Gopalakrishna committee gave its report, was not under its say scope of recommendation. Personal data was actually considered as sacrosanct. It has to be protected, and the concept of selling actually is not very easily accepted. Which is non-personal data which can be sold, and that sale can happen through an exchange. So this is what Chris Gopalakrishna committee said. So therefore, this data monetization has got a relationship to the governance of non-personal data as recommended by the Chris Gopalakrishna committee report. And along with, if data monetization has to be enabled in the law, then we have to also ensure that we make a distinction between personal data and non-personal data, ensure that anonymized personal data is not considered as personal data, and therefore give some kind of freedom to the organizations to monetize the personal data. And sometimes they may have to profile, and if profiling has to be done, that also has to be permitted. So creating an advertising profile strategy and allowing it as per law, and allowing the monetization of either the profile or the individual data which contributes to the profile is something which perhaps the government of India should consider, and irrespective of the complaints they may receive from privacy activists, some of whom may even go to the court, the government actually should have the conviction of what they are doing. In fact, in the coming days, there are going to be many digital assets which will have some kind of a value. In fact, crypto assets are one such thing. Of course, we are not recommending that crypto assets should be recognized, but there are certain digital assets which may have a value of their own. And these new kinds of assets, as well as the basic personal data set, they could be monetized. And I think a discussion is required on this concept of monetization. And in our IDPS, there is a session meant for data valuation and data monetization. And perhaps we will be able to discuss how data has to be, first of all, valued, and how the valued data has to be made visible to the management and to the other stakeholders. And finally, data monetization becomes a transparent way of creating value for the organization. Now, once the value is created for the organization, it is expected that they will share part of it to the data suppliers, probably through their services, which would otherwise be more costly than otherwise. So That is how we have to look at the data monetization concept in the emerging data protection law. Let us discuss and see what will come up in the course of time in India. Thank you.